Let me just ask you all, New York University was the first with a satellite campus partnership in Shanghai in 2013, Duke, Kane in New Jersey, University of Pittsburgh, Johns Hopkins, Fort Hays in Kansas, Carnegie Mellon, Missouri State University, and University of Michigan have all opened in the last year, these satellite money-rich efforts. And then there's 97 Confucius Institutes in the U.S., 429, as far as we can tell, worldwide, operating in universities in 115 countries. This is an all-out effort by the Chinese government. And let me just ask you, if I could, maybe to briefly focus on Hanban and their role in all of this. We understand that some 10,000 teachers are taught every year, recruited and then taught and then deployed. For example, is NYU branding authoritarianism and dictatorship? We asked the Congressional Research Service to look into this, and last year, again, I've asked NYU to be here. I said 15. It was 16 separate dates that we gave them, beginning on February 4th of last year, and gave them date. We said, we're available. We want to hear. We want real answers to genuine questions. And they gave us no response or can't testify, scheduling conflicts, overcommitted, and we will continue to try to get them to come here. But I'm especially concerned when the Congressional Research Service finds that for Chinese students, this is at their Shanghai campus, 2/3 of the $45,000 tuition cost is paid for by the Shanghai city government. That is a huge subsidization, not just of the building that's being handed over, but also to the actual student tuition. It raises questions. Who then gets to be the students? Who controls the admission policies? Maybe you can speak to that. I doubt if it's the son or daughter of a dissident or of a Falun Gong practitioner or a Protestant underground church leader or a Catholic Church member who's not a member of the Patriotic Church. It raises serious questions about how the filtering of who then comes in. You, Dr. Shah, gave excellent testimony about the Marxist mandatory political education, 5 compulsory courses, Mao Zedong, Marxism, elementary principles. Maybe you perhaps could expand upon that very briefly. A good news story is that a number of universities like Chicago, Pennsylvania State have cut ties with the Confucius Institutes. So there are some pushbacks. I would respectfully say it's happening because of your work. Like you, Dr. Cushman, the faculty are speaking up, and it's becoming the game changer out there. Is that a trend, or are these just isolated incidents that are happening? And I have a lot of other questions, but I'll just conclude with the other one and then yield to my colleagues. Last year, the Chinese Communist Party issued the 7 no's policy to universities and professors, including no discussion of democracy, freedom of the press, civil society, human rights, the Communist Party's mistakes in the past, the rich and the powerful class, an independent judiciary. How does this apply to the satellites? Do they have to follow that? And I could just add my own on the Internet. You mentioned, Dr. Shah, some of the problems there. Are they getting the same censorship? In 2006, I held the hearing, the beginning of a series of hearings on Google. We had Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Cisco testify. They were sworn in, and they basically told us they were just following Chinese law in the censorship. Now that's been handed over to Chinese companies who I believe are probably even more egregious in their censorship. What happens on these campuses? The Shanghai campus of NYU. Is this all? And then the last question would be on the enforcement of the egregious, horrific anti-woman policy called the one-child per couple policy and forced abortion. No unwed mother in China can have a baby. They can't get a birth allowed certificate. Just can't happen. Now, many women who attend college are still single. Are they then, how does NYU's Shanghai campus or any of these others implement that? If you could.
I would like to note the presence of Representative Wolf and thank him for coming. He, too, has been stalwart over the years in this cause, and that's wonderful. There are a number of questions here. I'll just tick off a few answers and turn to our fellow panelists. On the satellite campuses in China, fundamentally, the self-censorship problem, I think, is the same as the pressures that come to this side of the ocean. And in my view, those self-censorship problems are still the most far-reaching because they're invisible. You can't see that someone has self-censored. It just happens that the Dalai Lama isn't mentioned and that Tiananmen massacre isn't mentioned and so on. On the question of the Hanban and the teachers, the Hanban is presented as part of the Ministry of Education. That's false. It's from the State Council. It's from the Communist Party. It is a political program. For those of you who don't know Chinese, that's the name of the office that sponsors the Confucius Institutes and much of this whole global reach soft power project. The point I would like to make about the teachers in the Hanban is that they're trained to represent the Communist Party when they come abroad, and do so that even in informal contexts, when they come to Texas or California or wherever it is, they feel they need to be, quote-unquote, patriotic, which means pro-Communist Party. But in their defense, they don't necessarily themselves feel that way. If they're sent abroad and paid by the Hanban in order to be missionaries for the Communist Party of China and don't do it correctly, they can be punished when they go back to China. So it doesn't follow from the fact that every Hanban teacher that comes over is censoring and self-censoring. It doesn't follow that that's really what's inside them. I think this point we always have to bear in mind. Real Chinese people are like Dr. Xia. They're real Chinese people. They have values that aren't that different from our values. This universal values, I'm sorry, is not a myth. It's a true thing. On the question of the students' subsidies that you raised, the access, who gets to go to Shanghai satellite campuses or other campuses, you're quite right to suspect, this is very complex if you go into the statistics of it, but right to suspect that the privileged ones get the best access. I loved Dr. Xia's point a moment ago when he pointed out how much money the Hanban spends all around the world and neglects the poor children in the rural areas in their own country. That is really, this morning, my friend Renee Xia, who's here today, and I talked with Chen Guangcheng, the blind lawyer. We went to visit him, and that was his point. He knew I was coming to this, and he said, you have to make it clear that ordinary people in China suffer, and they're not part of this. This is part of a Communist Party elite who is running this program, and we mustn't forget that. I, of course, can't go to China, so I haven't been to the NYU campus, but I'll make my last comment that I have a friend who's there. I won't name him because I don't want to do it without his permission. An American scholar, and it answers your question, Mr. Chairman, about do those rules about you must be Marxist and the 7 no's and so on apply to American teachers that are there? It doesn't to him. He writes me emails about how much friction he goes through trying to defend liberal expression in a context where it goes against the grain to do that. So I think it's a messy answer to the question there. It's contentious, and of course should be contentious, so I salute my friend there.
I can't speak to the role of Hanban in particular on those kinds of issues. I would say that, as many people might know from my written testimony and also from the news, that I was part of an effort at Wellesley College to speak on behalf and to help protect Professor Xia after he was fired. And we drafted a letter, it was me and 6 other faculty members, that was signed by over 140 faculty members, which I'd like to take the occasion publicly in this chamber to thank them for doing that, because they didn't have to do that. And it was a very important thing to have done, and it did get attention from other people at other universities who wrote and said that we would like to do similar kinds of things. So what I think is that all efforts to combat what I would consider to be the most troubling aspect was when American universities or colleges start looking like Chinese universities and colleges in terms of what you can speak about. That we need to, it's an effort of resistance, and that professors from places that have satellite campuses, professors that have partnerships of the kind that I was talking about that were forged by MUOs that we don't really know much about, there has to be some collective action at that level in terms of pushing back on their own administrations. And the problem is with many of these smaller scale partnerships, which I think are more ubiquitous than obviously more ubiquitous than the satellite campuses, is that they're very often, in almost all cases, forged by the administrations of the universities or colleges and then just announced to the faculty. And so the issues of faculty governance and whether faculty actually control these are coming up, and that seems to me to be something really important to try to affect. But as I would stress, it is, given that people are following the money, given that there's a very distinct political economy of knowledge going on here that's all driven by politics and money, especially at public institutions which need more money for programs that have been cut, these kinds of efforts, these resistant efforts, whether it be teaching new kinds of courses or bringing dissidents, you're going against the tide, as it were.